Item B.
Items 7B and C, waive first reading and introduce an ordinance regarding amendments to remaining portions of San Bruno Municipal Code Title II, Administration and Personnel, as part of a comprehensive municipal code update. 1 second. And adopt 3 resolutions. 1, electing to become subject to the California Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act. 2, approving a master mutual aid agreement. And 3, adopting the Cal OES rules and regulations relative to workers' compensation benefits for disaster service volunteers. Also as 7C, waive first reading and introduce an ordinance regarding amendments to San Bruno Municipal Code Title III, Revenue and Finance, as part of a comprehensive municipal code update.
That's it, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. If it's okay with you, we'll take both of these items in sequence because they're both relating to the same thing, which is to revise the remainder of Title II and Title III of the Municipal Code. Our agenda for tonight is just a brief review of the background. We're going to discuss introducing the ordinance amending the remainder of Title II, and I apologize, I forgot to also include on my first slide here the 3 resolutions that are part of that, so we'll remind you to do that, and then introduce a new ordinance amending Title III, and then talk briefly about next steps. So these are the same slides as you saw last time. I won't spend a lot of time on them. We've been going through the process of revising the municipal code since last October, and if the City Council approves the introduction of the ordinances tonight, we will have gone through the first 3 chapters of the code, so we're making good progress. So at the last meeting, the City Council discussed and provided direction for the remainder of Title II, which is Administration and Personnel, and also Title III. So again, you saw this slide also at the last meeting, and we've listed for you the changes that are made in the code. There were no changes except for one, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, that were made to any of the sections of the code that we discussed last time. And by the way, I would like to ask you to ignore the errant yellow highlights that appear in a couple of places in the code. Somehow we weren't able to get rid of those artifacts. I'm not sure why. But the one thing I do want to bring your attention to is something that I discovered after our meeting last night, which is a potential problem with section 2.12.040. And as it currently written, it says that the City Council shall, by resolution, approve a list of qualified persons in order of succession who would perform the city manager's duty in the event of absence or disability or in case of a vacancy. And the problem that I identified with that language is it's so broad that it could conceivably apply to situations where the city manager is on a one-day vacation. So what we wanted to do is, and my recommendation is that we change the shall adopt a resolution to may adopt a resolution, which allows you to do it in the circumstances where it makes sense to do that. But then also we added a sentence that said, whenever the city manager is referred to in the code, it shall include any person designated by the city manager to perform such duties as are delegated to the designee. And the short interpretation of that is when the city manager is away, he or she can delegate to somebody else the duties in the code. And that's actually quite important in situations where there are duties that are being performed by designees of the city manager, and not just for city manager functions, but there are a great many things in the code that say the city manager is empowered to do this, that, and the other thing. And so oftentimes those duties are already delegated to other individuals. And if there's ever a court proceeding or an action in which we have to prove that that designee has the authority to do that, it's actually very difficult to do that. You know, what are we going to point to? So here what we're going to be able to point to is that we have an ordinance that says the city manager can make those delegations. So I think that's an important thing to have in the code. You'll also see this coming up in another section of the code we're going to get to next year, which is in section 7, having to do with the duties of the city engineer and the city traffic engineer, where we're going to tighten up some of those definitions and make sure that those positions or designees are able to make those sorts of decisions about traffic engineering that we can then use looking ahead in court proceedings. So that was really the genesis of this change.
Through the chair. I mean, through the chair.
Don't do it.
Marcus, may I speak?
Of course.
Flashback. Just so I'm clear, so really what it does is it clearly defines, so the city manager must have been listening to me one day. So it just takes the word out, shall to may. So the city council still may ask for succession planning. So for example, whether it's assistant city manager, whether it's department head 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that still gives us that ability, right, to ask the city manager for that to be given to us, correct?
Absolutely.
Doesn't have to, you don't have to ask the city manager for it to be given to you. You have that authority. And
Right,
so
that's what I'm just clarifying, that may and shall, but anyway, so the city council still has that ability
That's correct.
for current or future managers.
That is correct.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, so quickly, moving ahead to the remainder of Title II, we didn't have any other changes. Remember here, the main issue is streamlining of our purchasing ordinance and adoption of the uniform cost accounting system, which will help the city staff be much more efficient and time-sensitive with respect to projects that are under about $200,000. So we're going to make all of those changes, and then there's a resolution that you have to adopt about that as well. And then the last thing to highlight in the emergency preparedness ordinance is that, as we talked about last time, that requires compliance with the state ordinance. And we did go ahead and send this ordinance to the state for their approval. They haven't responded yet. And so what we're planning to do, we hope it's going to come soon. I've now established a number of contacts at state OES and also FEMA, having been a speaker at a conference actually just yesterday on disaster preparedness and planning in Sacramento. So I think we will hopefully get this approved in the near future, but I won't bring it back for adoption until it is approved, just so you're not approving something that the state hasn't formally done. So then moving to Title III, there were no changes from our discussion last time to this title. Remember, this is the one in which you can't do anything that increases the tax that anybody pays without a vote of the people, but instead what we did is pave the way for the city council to adopt a regulatory ordinance regarding rental agent. And so then when the community development department and staff comes back with a regulatory ordinance for the homestay, Airbnbs, and so on, we can require that either the hosts and or those platforms pay the TOT and so collect that revenue. That'll be coming back at some point next year. So there are no other changes to that, and so the next steps would be simply to not only introduce the ordinance Title II, introduce Title III. We have 3 resolutions, each of which require a separate motion, and those resolutions are, number 1, for the emergency, not in any particular order, but for the emergency preparedness. Number 2, to make sure that the volunteers are covered by workers' compensation, and number 3, to enroll the city in the Uniform Cost Construction Accounting Act. So we'll bring those back for adoption, as I say, once the state approves it. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Just for clarification, so we do need to waive the first reading and introduce the ordinance and then also the 3 resolutions?
That is for item 7B, yes.
All right, do I have any action or questions for Mr. Zaffarano?
Through the chair.
Michael?
So one question I had was regarding the registering of disaster service workers, and I was just curious what the city is currently doing regarding that, and it looks like that's something that's being addressed, so I was just curious what we're currently doing and what we might do differently because of this.
Sure. So a lot of that work happens through our emergency preparedness committee. So I'll ask the fire chief to come up.
Good evening, Ian. So currently, our CERT program is, as we talked about, is an educational thing. We try to train as many residents, and we don't have a CERT program that has a CERT team. That would require probably some additional staff, or at least staff time to do that. Some other cities do. What this does, though, however, will allow us to do in an event of a disaster, it will allow us to those spontaneous volunteers to process them and register them as disaster service workers for that particular event.
Okay. And currently, all city employees are designated as disaster service workers currently?
I believe it's all full-time employees, not part-time employees, correct?
And in terms of registering those employees, is there like a database or a call list or something that would say, here are all the people that are potentially available to serve in a disaster?
Internally we do, so we train there's a process to go through that process. There's some training, ICS training that all staff does upon hiring. And we have a whole program to explain what disaster service worker is, what their roles could be, how their hours could change, how their duties could change. So all employees have that. HR handles that process with our guidance.
Okay. All right. That was it. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, if I may indulge the city council just for one more minute, I think it's important for you and also the public to know that the conference that I attended yesterday was the first conference in which both city attorneys and county council attended, and it was all about disaster preparedness and how to respond to a disaster. And I and other members of county council's offices across the state, as well as other cities, put together and developed 3 binders full of documents that are all of the documents that any city or county could ever want with respect to any type of disaster or emergency. And those binders are now, and those materials will be available and are available online, not only for anybody's use throughout the state, but also, of course, the city's use. And I'll be meeting with, I just talked to the fire chief earlier today, meeting with him and other members of staff to make sure that the city not only is able to use all of those documents, but has done all of the things that were recommended at the conference to do for emergency preparedness. It was really, frankly, a remarkable thing. It was the first one I had been to, and I just wanted to pass along that there is a great deal of advanced planning that went into it, and hopefully we'll be able to see the benefits of that if there ever is another emergency. But it did point out how many cities and counties have had emergencies of various kinds, both human-made and otherwise, and how important it is to have the upfront disaster planning. So that'll be one of the things that I just decided I needed to take on to make sure that the city is as prepared as possible, both from a legal standpoint and also as well from an operational standpoint.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Any other questions?
I do have some more.
Please.
So actually just one more question. So I noticed in the taxing section of this, that there's still some references to things that are in some cases specific and in some cases very archaic, and I'm just wondering, do we need to keep those in there? I mean, there was references to stamp redemption stores and shuffleboard, how we tax shuffleboard courts, and so I'm wondering, none of those things exist. Bowling alleys, bowling alley, maybe somebody would open a bowling alley, but do we need to be that specific in how we address those things? And does it make sense to keep some of those things? I don't think shuffleboard's ever going to be like a thing, but I don't know.
Well, like you, Councilmember Salazar, I thought for sure the answer to that question was going to be no, we don't need to keep any of those things. And then I made the mistake of contacting our outside tax counsel that we use for a number of things. And his caution was, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Because in the tax section, you don't want to do anything that might have the even inadvertent result of increasing a tax that somebody else pays. So his advice was keep it in there even if it's archaic. It doesn't matter. It's not hurting anybody. And that goes against sort of every updating instinct that I had, certainly, and that you and others may have. But that was his advice. Keep it in unless it's creating a problem. And it's not creating a problem, so that's why we left it in.
Okay. I'll buy that. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other comments or questions, this is in regards to 7B. We need to have a motion to waive the first reading.
So moved.
Second.
There's been a motion made and second to waive the first reading. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, 5-0. Now we need to introduce the ordinance, please.
I'll introduce the ordinance, keeping the shuffleboard in.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Salazar?
Aye.
Vice Mayor O'Connell?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye. Now, under the same, you want us to take the three various resolutions?
Yes, please.
Electing, so the first one is electing to become subject to the California Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act. Do we have anybody to introduce the resolution? Or make a motion for the resolution?
I'll introduce the resolution.
Is there a second?
Second.
Council-
Lord.
Councilmember Davis, Councilmember Medina,
Aye.
Councilmember Salazar,
Aye.
Vice Mayor O'Connell,
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Next resolution is for approving a master mutual aid agreement.
I'll introduce the resolution.
Second.
Councilmember Davis,
Aye.
Councilmember Medina,
Aye.
Councilmember Salazar,
Aye.
Vice Mayor O'Connell,
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Last one in this section, adopting the Cal OES rules and regulations relevant to workers' compensation benefits for disaster service volunteers.
And I'll introduce that resolution.
Second.
Councilmember Davis,
Aye.
Councilmember Medina,
Aye.
Councilmember Salazar,
Aye.
Vice Mayor O'Connell,
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Now moving to 7C on Title III. So we need to have a motion to waive the first reading.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 5-0. And then introducing the ordinance.
I'll introduce the ordinance.
Councilmember Davis,
Aye.
Councilmember Medina,
Aye.
Councilmember Salazar,
Aye.
Vice Mayor O'Connell,
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Thank you very much.